This story is inspired by real-life events, contains fictional elements, and is not suitable for viewers under the age of 18.
Some betrayals destroy a man, others forge him into something far more dangerous. The night Adrian Keller discovered his wife walking out of his boss's hotel room, he thought his life had ended. What he did not realize then was that one day the same man who humiliated him would be forced to sit across a boardroom table and answer to him. Seattle rain had a way of making the city look like a reflection of itself. Glass towers blurred by mist, headlights streaking across wet pavement like fading memories. Adrian Keller stood near the kitchen window of his apartment on the 23rd floor, staring down at the quiet streets below. He held a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Behind him, the apartment smelled faintly of vanilla candles and expensive perfume. Vanessa's perfume. "Are you going to work tonight, or are you just going to stare at the rain all morning?" Vanessa's voice floated from the bedroom. Adrian smiled faintly. "I'm thinking," he replied. "That sounds dangerous," she teased. Vanessa Keller emerged a moment later, fastening the last button of her ivory blouse. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, the kind of effortless beauty that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. Adrian still remembered the first time he saw her. University Library, second floor. She was arguing with the librarian about a late fee, speaking with the kind of confidence that suggested the world had always bent slightly in her direction. He had fallen in love almost immediately. Now, 8 years later, he sometimes wondered whether he had ever truly known her. "You're going to be late," Vanessa said, grabbing her handbag. Adrian checked the clock. 8:20. "Gregory hates when people show up after 8:30, he muttered. Vanessa smiled knowingly. "Your famous boss." Adrian shrugged. Gregory Lawson was more than famous in Seattle's tech circles. He was powerful. 46 years old, CEO of Lawson Dynamics, a rapidly expanding artificial intelligence company. Magazine interviews, keynote speeches, charity galas. Gregory moved through elite circles with the ease of a man who had long ago decided the rules did not apply to him. Adrian had worked at Lawson Dynamics for 4 years. Long hours, relentless pressure. But it was the kind of opportunity engineers dreamed about. Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter, studying him. "You know," she said slowly, "Gregory actually asked about you last night." Adrian looked up. "He did?" She nodded casually. "At the fundraiser." Adrian frowned. "Wait, Gregory was there?" "Of course he was," Vanessa said. "He donated $50,000. Adrian blinked. "You never told me you went to that event." "You were working late again," she replied, her tone light but edged with something sharper. "Some of us have social lives." Adrian rubbed the back of his neck. "That's fair." Vanessa walked toward him, placing a quick kiss on his cheek. "You work too much," she said. "You like the apartment, though." She glanced around the sleek living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a view of the Seattle skyline. "It's comfortable," she said. But Adrian noticed the hesitation. Vanessa had grown up dreaming bigger than comfortable. She loved rooftop parties, luxury hotels, designer dresses. Adrian loved quiet mornings and stable paychecks. Two different definitions of success. "Anyway," Vanessa continued, picking up her car keys, "Gregory said something interesting." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "He said you're one of the smartest engineers in the company." Adrian laughed softly. "That's generous." "No," Vanessa said thoughtfully. "He seemed impressed." Adrian shrugged. "Gregory impresses investors. I write code." "Maybe that's the problem," she said. The words hung in the air longer than either of them expected. Adrian turned slowly. "What do you mean?" Vanessa hesitated, then smiled. "Nothing." But Adrian knew that tone, the same tone she used when something disappointed her, but she didn't want to say it out loud. "You can say it," Adrian said quietly. Vanessa sighed. "I just think you play it too safe." "How so?" "You're brilliant, Adrian," she said, "but you hide behind your computer. Gregory built an empire." Adrian felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm not Gregory." "That's obvious," she said. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Vanessa checked her phone. "I should go," she said. Adrian nodded. "Dinner tonight?" "Maybe," she said. "I might meet some friends." She headed for the door, then paused. "Oh," she added casually, "Gregory said you should come to the corporate conference next month." Adrian frowned. "I wasn't invited." "You are now," Vanessa said with a strange smile. Then she left. The apartment felt quieter after the door closed. Adrian stood alone in the kitchen for several minutes. Something about the conversation unsettled him. Not the words, the tone. The way Vanessa said Gregory's name, as if she already knew him better than Adrian did. Adrian shook the thought away. Paranoia, nothing more. He grabbed his coat and headed for work. But as he stepped into the elevator, a strange feeling followed him. A feeling he could not yet name. High above the rainy streets of Seattle, the illusion of Adrian Keller's life was still perfectly intact. But cracks had already begun to form. And soon, the truth would begin to seep through. By the middle of October, Seattle's rain had settled into its familiar rhythm. Steady, gray, and persistent, like a quiet reminder that winter was always waiting just around the corner. Adrian Keller had always liked this time of year. The city slowed down. People stayed inside. Coffee shops filled with programmers, students, and writers tapping away at laptops while jazz music played softly in the background. But lately, Adrian found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before. Small things. Things that felt insignificant on their own, yet together they formed a pattern he could not ignore. It began with Vanessa's phone. At first, it was just the way she kept it face down on the table. Then came the sudden habit of stepping into another room when she answered calls. One evening, Adrian was sitting at the dining table reviewing code when Vanessa's phone buzzed beside him. The screen lit up briefly. Gregory Lawson. Adrian frowned. He wasn't surprised Gregory had Vanessa's number. They had met several times at company events. Still, it felt unusual. Vanessa emerged from the bedroom a moment later. She noticed Adrian glancing at the phone. Her expression tightened, just slightly. "Someone texting you?" she asked. Adrian nodded toward the phone. "Gregory." Vanessa picked it up quickly. "Oh, he's organizing the conference next month." She typed something quickly and placed the phone in her pocket. Adrian watched her carefully. "What does my boss need to text you about?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Relax, Adrian. It's not a conspiracy." "I didn't say it was. You were thinking it." She opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of sparkly water. "You're working with him now on that AI project, right?" she continued. "Yes." "Well," she said casually, "he asked if you'd confirmed your attendance for the conference." Adrian frowned. "He could have asked me." Vanessa shrugged. "Maybe he thought I'd remind you." Something about that explanation felt rehearsed. Adrian pushed the thought aside. "You going out tonight?" he asked. Vanessa twisted the bottle cap open. "Maybe." "With who?" "Claire and Madison." Adrian nodded slowly. Claire and Madison were Vanessa's friends from marketing, both loud, glamorous, and always posting photos from rooftop bars. "What time will you be back?" Vanessa smirked. "Curfew now?" "I didn't say that." "You implied it." Adrian sighed. "I'm just asking." She took a sip of water, studying him. "You're being weird lately." "Weird?" "Yes." "How?" "Suspicious." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "I saw Gregory texting you." "So?" "So I asked about it." "And now you're interrogating me." "I'm not interrogating you." Vanessa laughed softly. "You kind of are." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "You've been out a lot lately." Vanessa's expression hardened. "I have friends." "I know." "Then what's the problem?" "There isn't one," Adrian said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something had changed. Vanessa used to tell him everything. Now conversations felt edited, like certain details had been carefully removed. That night she left around 8:30. Adrian stayed home. By midnight, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. At 12:45, Vanessa still hadn't returned. Adrian tried to focus on work. He couldn't. At 1:15, the front door finally opened. Vanessa stepped inside quietly. Her heels clicked against the floor. "You're still awake?" she asked. Adrian glanced at the clock. "You said dinner." Vanessa tossed her purse on the couch. "Plans changed." "With Claire and Madison?" "Yes." Her answer came too quickly. Adrian stood up. "You smell like whiskey." "It's a bar, Adrian. I thought it was dinner." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Oh my God." "What?" You're doing it again. Doing what? This, she said, waving her hand. The jealous husband routine. Adrian blinked. I'm not jealous. Then stop acting like it. I asked a simple question. No, she said sharply. You're looking for something to accuse me of. Adrian felt his chest tighten. I didn't accuse you of anything. Vanessa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You know what I think? What? I think you're insecure. The word landed like a slap. Insecure? Adrian repeated quietly. Yes, about what? Vanessa laughed bitterly. Look at Gregory Lawson. Adrian's stomach dropped slightly. What about him? He's confident, powerful, successful. Adrian said nothing. And you, she continued, act like a guy who's afraid someone might take what little he has. The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian's voice was calm when he finally spoke. Are you saying I should worry about Gregory? Vanessa stared at him for a long moment. Then she scoffed. Unbelievable. What? You really think I'd sleep with your boss? I didn't say that, but you were thinking it. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again. Vanessa grabbed her purse. I'm going to bed, she said coldly. She paused in the hallway. Oh, and Adrian? Yes? If you keep acting like this, she said quietly, you're going to destroy this marriage all by yourself. The bedroom door closed behind her. Adrian stood alone in the living room. Outside, rain streaked down the glass windows of the apartment. He stared at the city lights, replaying the conversation in his mind. Insecure, jealous, paranoid. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was imagining things. Yet deep inside, a quiet instinct refused to go away. Something was wrong. And the worst part? He didn't know if he was strong enough to face the answer. Across the city, in a luxury penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, Gregory Lawson poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch. Vanessa Keller stood beside the window, staring out at the dark water below. Gregory handed her the glass. You handled him? Gregory asked. Vanessa took a slow sip. He suspects something. Gregory smirked. They always do. Vanessa glanced toward the door uneasily. You said this wouldn't get complicated. Gregory stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her waist. It won't. His voice was smooth, confident. The voice of a man who had spent decades getting exactly what he wanted. Vanessa hesitated. And Adrian? She asked softly. Gregory chuckled. He works for me. He lifted his glass. What exactly is he going to do? Vanessa didn't answer, because deep down, even she didn't know. The Grand Aurora Hotel stood like a polished jewel in downtown Seattle. 30 floors of glass, marble, and quiet luxury overlooking Puget Sound. For most employees at Lawson Dynamics, the annual corporate conference felt like a reward after a year of brutal deadlines and sleepless nights. Executives delivered polished presentations about innovation and growth, while investors circulated through elegant cocktail receptions. Adrian Keller stood near the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched. The room glowed under crystal chandeliers. Laughter rose and fell in comfortable waves. On the stage, Gregory Lawson was finishing his keynote speech. Artificial intelligence is not just the future, Gregory said confidently, his voice echoing through the room. It is the present, and Lawson Dynamics will be the company that defines it. Applause filled the hall. Gregory smiled, the controlled, charismatic smile of a man who understood how power worked in public spaces. Adrian watched from the shadows. To most people in the room, Gregory Lawson looked like the embodiment of success. Sharp suit, perfect posture, calm authority, a leader. But Adrian had begun noticing something strange over the past few weeks. Gregory had started treating him differently. More attention, more praise. At first, Adrian had assumed it was professional recognition. Now he wasn't so sure. Gregory stepped down from the stage and immediately became surrounded by executives and investors. Adrian turned away. Across the ballroom, he spotted Vanessa. She stood near the bar wearing a deep emerald dress that caught the light every time she moved. Several men were already trying to start conversations with her. Vanessa had always been the kind of woman who drew attention without trying. When their eyes met, she smiled. But something about the smile felt distant. Adrian approached her. "Enjoying the conference?" he asked. Vanessa shrugged playfully. "Free champagne and powerful men talking about money? It's practically a cultural experience." Adrian chuckled softly. "Careful, one of those powerful men signs my paycheck." Vanessa glanced across the room. Gregory Lawson had just entered a private hallway leading toward the executive suites. Her gaze lingered there for a fraction too long. Adrian noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked. Vanessa blinked and looked back at him. "Of course. You seem distracted." "I'm just bored," she said lightly. A waiter passed by with a tray of drinks. Vanessa grabbed another glass of champagne. "You're staying for the networking party upstairs, right?" she asked. Adrian nodded. "Probably for a bit." "Good," she said. "I might go up early." "Why?" "Claire and Madison are meeting me." Adrian frowned slightly. "I didn't know they were invited." Vanessa smiled. "They're not." Before Adrian could respond, someone tapped him on the shoulder. "Adrian." He turned. Gregory Lawson stood behind him. Up close, Gregory's presence always felt slightly overwhelming, like standing next to someone who carried invisible gravity. "Good presentation today," Gregory said. "Your machine learning model impressed the investors." Adrian nodded politely. "Thank you." Gregory's gaze briefly flickered toward Vanessa. "Well," Gregory continued smoothly, "enjoy the evening." Then he walked away. Vanessa watched him go. Adrian noticed again. "You two seem familiar," he said casually. Vanessa laughed. "Please, I've spoken to him twice." Adrian studied her face. There was no hesitation, no visible crack in her expression. If she was lying, she was very good at it. The networking party upstairs lasted longer than Adrian expected. By 10:30, the rooftop lounge was crowded with executives discussing funding rounds and partnerships over expensive whiskey. Adrian tried to stay engaged in conversation, but his mind drifted repeatedly. Where was Vanessa? He checked his phone. No messages. At 11:15, he finally texted her. "Where are you?" No response. Another 30 minutes passed. Adrian stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the city. Seattle stretched endlessly beneath him, lights reflecting off dark water. His phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. "Upstairs, coming down later." Adrian frowned. Upstairs? The executive suites occupied the top floor. Employees didn't normally go there. Maybe she meant another lounge. Still, something tugged at the back of his mind. By midnight, Adrian decided to leave the party. The elevators were slow, so he took the stairs up one level to see if there was another bar. The hallway on the executive floor was quiet. Soft carpet, dim lighting, closed doors. Adrian stopped walking. At the far end of the corridor, a door opened, and Vanessa stepped out. Adrian's heart stopped. She froze when she saw him. Behind her, another figure stood partially visible in the doorway. Gregory Lawson. The world seemed to shrink into a single unbearable moment. Vanessa recovered first. "Adrian," she said quickly. Adrian's voice came out hoarse. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her before Gregory could fully appear. "It's not what you think," she said immediately. Adrian stared at her. "Really?" Her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick faintly smudged. Adrian didn't need to look any further. "You came out of his room," Adrian said quietly. Vanessa shook her head rapidly. "He invited me up to talk about your career." Adrian blinked. "My career?" "Yes," she insisted. "He wanted to discuss a promotion for you." Adrian let out a hollow laugh. "At midnight." Vanessa stepped closer. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Nothing happened." Adrian's eyes searched her face desperately. "Then why were you in his room?" Vanessa hesitated. "Just for a second." "Because he asked me to come up." The answer sounded weak even to her. Adrian glanced at the door behind her. Gregory did not come out. Of course he didn't. Men like Gregory Lawson never stepped into uncomfortable situations. They let other people clean up the mess. Adrian felt something inside his chest slowly collapsing. Years of trust, 8 years of marriage, all crumbling in silence. Vanessa grabbed his arm. "Adrian, listen to me." He gently pulled away. "Was it just tonight?" he asked quietly. Vanessa's expression hardened. "I told you nothing happened." "You're lying." Her eyes flashed. "Maybe if you weren't so insecure." Adrian flinched. There it was again, that word. insecure. The hallway felt suffocating. Adrian realized something terrible in that moment. He could fight. He could scream. He could punch Gregory Lawson's door and drag the truth into the open. But none of it would undo what had already happened. The betrayal had already crossed the line. Quietly. Irreversibly. Adrian looked at Vanessa one last time. "I believe you," he said softly. Vanessa blinked in surprise. "You do?" Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes." But the calmness in his voice frightened her, because something had changed behind his eyes, something colder, something distant. Adrian turned and walked down the hallway. Vanessa stood frozen outside the door. Behind her, Gregory finally opened it slightly. "You handled it?" Gregory asked casually. Vanessa didn't answer. She was still staring at Adrian's disappearing figure, because the look on his face was not the look of a man who had been convinced. It was the look of a man who had just lost something forever. And deep down, Vanessa felt the first whisper of something she had not expected. Fear. The morning after the conference arrived quietly. Seattle woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds, the air cool and damp as autumn settled deeper into the city. Adrian Keller sat alone in the hotel cafe, staring at a laptop screen filled with lines of code he wasn't really reading. He had slept for exactly 1 hour. Not because he couldn't sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image. Vanessa stepping out of Gregory Lawson's suite, her hand still on the door handle, the faint panic in her voice when she said, "It's not what you think." Adrian took a slow sip of black coffee. It tasted bitter. He welcomed it. Pain, at least, felt honest. Across the room, employees from Lawson Dynamics were laughing over breakfast, discussing presentations from the previous day. No one knew what had happened. The world hadn't changed. But Adrian had. Something inside him had shifted during that silent walk down the hallway the night before. The man who had entered that corridor, confused, hopeful, desperate for reassurance, no longer existed. Adrian closed the laptop. He suddenly understood something with absolute clarity. He could scream. He could fight. He could expose the affair. But none of that would restore the one thing that mattered: trust. And without trust, there was nothing left to save. Adrian finished his coffee, stood up, and walked out of the hotel. 3 weeks later, Adrian submitted his resignation. Gregory Lawson called him into the executive office immediately. The office occupied the top floor of Lawson Dynamics headquarters, glass walls overlooking Seattle's skyline like a throne above the city. Gregory stood behind his desk when Adrian entered. "Adrian," he said smoothly, "I heard you're leaving." Adrian nodded. "Yes." Gregory studied him carefully. "You're one of my best engineers." "I appreciate that. So, why resign?" Adrian kept his voice neutral. "I want to build something of my own." Gregory leaned back in his chair. "A startup?" "Yes." Gregory chuckled. "You know the failure rate for tech startups is over 90%. Adrian said nothing. Gregory continued. "You have stability here, resources, a team." Adrian met his gaze calmly. "And a ceiling." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement." Adrian simply shrugged. "I'm ready to take the risk." Gregory stood and walked around the desk. For a moment, the two men stood only a few feet apart. Neither mentioned the conference. Neither mentioned Vanessa. Gregory placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "Ambition is admirable," Gregory said quietly. "But be careful." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Of what?" Gregory smiled faintly. "The world outside companies like this can be unforgiving." Adrian almost laughed. "You have no idea." But he only said, "I'll take my chances." At home, the atmosphere had become strangely polite. Vanessa behaved as though the hotel incident had never happened. She made coffee in the mornings, asked casual questions about his day, laughed at television shows in the evening. The normalcy felt surreal. One night, Adrian finally spoke. "I quit Lawson Dynamics." Vanessa looked up from her phone. "You did what?" I resigned. Her eyes widened. Adrian, that job pays nearly $200,000 a year. I know. Why would you walk away from that? I'm starting a company. Vanessa stared at him as if he had just announced he planned to move to the moon. A company? Yes. With what funding? My savings. Vanessa laughed incredulously. That's insane. It's a risk. No, she said sharply. It's irresponsible. Adrian remained calm. I've already filed the paperwork. Vanessa set her phone down slowly. So this is it? What do you mean? You're throwing away everything we've built so you can play entrepreneur? Adrian studied her expression carefully. There was no concern in her voice, only disappointment. Everything we built? Adrian repeated quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. Yes. Adrian almost said something then, almost asked her if everything included Gregory Lawson's hotel suite, but he stopped himself. There was no point. You don't believe I can do it, Adrian said. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. Finally, she sighed. You're brilliant, Adrian. But brilliance isn't the same as success. And Gregory Lawson represents success? Her gaze flickered. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant. Vanessa stood up. I can't have this argument again. Again? Yes, she snapped. Your insecurity about Gregory is exhausting. Adrian felt something inside him go completely still. There it was. The same word again. Insecure. He nodded slowly. You're right. Vanessa blinked. I am? Yes. He stood and walked toward the bedroom. Adrian, she called after him. He paused. Yes? Vanessa hesitated. For a brief moment, something uncertain appeared in her expression. You're really doing this? She asked quietly. Yes. With or without me? Adrian turned slightly. That's your decision. Vanessa looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up her purse. I'm staying with Claire tonight. The door closed behind her minutes later. Adrian sat alone in the apartment. The silence felt different this time. Not empty. Clear. 3 months later, Vanessa moved out permanently. The divorce papers arrived shortly afterward. Her reason was simple. Irreconcilable differences. The following year was the hardest of Adrian's life. He rented a small office above a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. The space barely fit 3 desks. Most nights, Adrian slept on a couch beside his workstation. Investors rejected his proposals repeatedly. Some weeks he lived on instant noodles and gas station coffee. But something inside him had changed. Pain had sharpened his focus. Every line of code he wrote felt like reclaiming a small piece of himself. 2 years passed, then 3. Adrian Keller's startup, Helix Mind Technologies, began attracting attention. His machine learning platform solved problems larger companies had ignored. Investors started calling him. Tech magazines mentioned his name. The small office grew into a real company, 10 employees, then 20, then 50. And somewhere across Seattle's glittering corporate landscape, Gregory Lawson began hearing that name more and more often. Adrian Keller. One evening, 5 years after the night at the hotel, Adrian stood in his office overlooking the Seattle skyline. The Helix Mind headquarters occupied the 32nd floor of a new glass tower downtown. Far below, traffic moved like glowing rivers through the city. Adrian held a tablet displaying the latest industry news. A headline caught his attention. Lawson Dynamics facing declining market share. He read the article slowly. Poor leadership decisions, failed product launches, investor dissatisfaction. Adrian set the tablet down. Fate, it seemed, had a strange sense of timing. Because tomorrow morning, Helix Mind Technologies would begin negotiations for the largest acquisition deal in its history. And the target company was Lawson Dynamics. Adrian stared out across Seattle's skyline. For the first time in years, a faint smile touched his face. Not a smile of revenge, not yet, but something quieter, something inevitable. The quiet rebirth had begun, and the past was finally beginning to circle back. 5 years could change a man. It could also change the balance of power in an entire industry. Seattle in early spring looked brighter than Adrian Keller remembered from his earlier years. The gray winter clouds had begun to thin, revealing glimpses of pale blue sky above the steel and glass skyline. From the 32nd floor of Helix Mind Technologies headquarters, the city stretched endlessly toward the water. Adrian stood in front of the panoramic window, hands in his pockets, watching the slow morning traffic moving along Interstate 5 like quiet streams of light. Behind him, the office buzzed with energy. Programmers debated algorithms, product managers reviewed timelines, investors arrived for meetings that would once have seemed impossible. Helix Mind Technologies had grown far beyond the tiny startup Adrian had once run from a cramped office above a coffee shop. What began with 3 engineers and 1 broken couch had become a company employing more than 200 people. And the industry had started paying attention. "Morning, Adrian." Adrian turned. Maya Sullivan, Helix Mind's chief operations officer, stepped into the office carrying a tablet and a stack of printed reports. Maya had joined the company during its 2nd year, when Helix Mind was still struggling to survive. She had believed in Adrian's vision before most investors had. Now she ran the operational side of a company valued at nearly $2 billion. "You're here early," she said. Adrian smiled faintly. "I never stopped." Maya placed the reports on his desk. "Investor call at 10, product strategy meeting at 11:30, and there's something else you should see." She tapped the tablet screen and handed it to him. A business news article filled the display. "Lawson Dynamics stock falls 20% after failed product launch." Adrian read silently. "Another bad quarter," Maya said. Adrian handed the tablet back. "They expanded too fast." "That's not all," Maya continued. "Their leadership decisions have been questionable." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Questionable how?" "3 major projects canceled in the last 18 months, Maya explained. 2 senior engineers resigned. Investors are losing confidence." Adrian walked slowly back toward the window. 5 years ago, Lawson Dynamics had seemed like an untouchable empire. Now cracks were appearing. "What's Gregory Lawson doing about it?" Adrian asked. Maya shrugged. "Publicly, he says the company is repositioning for long-term innovation." Adrian chuckled softly. "Corporate language for 'we're in trouble.'" Maya studied him carefully. "You don't sound surprised." Adrian wasn't. Because he had spent years studying the same market, understanding the same technological shifts. Lawson Dynamics had once led the artificial intelligence sector, but Gregory Lawson had grown complacent. Power had a way of doing that. "He's chasing short-term profits," Adrian said calmly. "Investors love it for about 3 years. And after that, the foundation collapses." Maya nodded slowly. "You always did understand how this industry works." Adrian glanced back at her. Pain is an excellent teacher. Maya didn't ask what he meant. Some parts of Adrian's past remained unspoken inside the company. Most employees only knew that Helix Mind's founder was intensely private about his personal life. Later that afternoon, Adrian attended a technology summit at the Seattle Convention Center. Helix Mind had been invited to present its newest machine learning platform to a group of investors and corporate leaders. The main auditorium held nearly 500 people. Adrian stood on stage beneath bright lights, the massive screen behind him displaying a live demonstration of Helix Mind's predictive intelligence system. "Our goal," Adrian said calmly into the microphone, "was never to compete with existing artificial intelligence platforms." The audience listened carefully. "We wanted to redesign how they think." A graph appeared on the screen. The system processed massive datasets in seconds. Investment analysts exchanged impressed glances. Technology reporters typed rapidly. When the presentation ended, the applause lasted longer than Adrian expected. Afterward, dozens of executives approached him. Some wanted partnerships, others wanted investment opportunities. One venture capitalist shook Adrian's hand enthusiastically. "Helix Mind is the future of this industry," the man said. Adrian thanked him politely, but his attention drifted toward the far end of the hall. A familiar figure stood near the exit, tall, confident, older than Adrian remembered, Gregory Lawson. For a moment, the noise of the conference faded into the background. 5 years since that night in the hotel corridor. 5 years since Adrian had walked away without a single accusation. Gregory noticed him watching. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Gregory smiled politely, the same practiced smile he had used during countless investor meetings. Then he walked over. Adrian Keller, Gregory said warmly. It's been a long time. Adrian extended his hand. Gregory. They shook hands. Gregory studied him carefully. You've done well for yourself. Adrian shrugged slightly. Helix Mind is doing well. Gregory nodded. I saw the presentation. Impressive work. Thank you. Gregory glanced around the crowded hall. You always had potential. I told people that years ago. Adrian almost laughed. You did. Gregory leaned slightly closer. You know, he said quietly, there was a time when you could have built something like this inside Lawson Dynamics. Adrian met his gaze calmly. Maybe. Gregory tilted his head. But you chose the harder path. Yes. Gregory studied him for a moment longer. Then he smiled again. Well, sometimes risk pays off. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, Gregory added casually, I ran into Vanessa a few months ago. Adrian's expression did not change. She mentioned that. Gregory nodded. She seems, well... Adrian said nothing. Gregory slipped his hands into his pockets. You two ever talk anymore? Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. No. Gregory smiled faintly. Probably for the best. For a brief moment, the air between them grew colder. Then Gregory nodded politely and walked away. Adrian watched him disappear into the crowd. Across the convention hall, reporters continued discussing Helix Mind's presentation. Investors whispered about the company's growing influence. The industry had begun shifting, slowly, inevitably, and Adrian Keller stood at the center of that shift. Later that evening, he returned to his office overlooking the city. Maya was waiting. The investors love the presentation, she said. We've already received 2 acquisition proposals. Adrian nodded. Good. Maya sat down across from him. There's something else. She slid a financial report across the desk. Adrian read the title. Lawson Dynamics. Confidential Investor Analysis. Where did you get this? He asked. Industry contacts, Maya replied. Their financial situation is worse than the public realizes. Adrian flipped through the pages. Declining revenue, rising debt, internal instability. He closed the report slowly. They're vulnerable, Maya said. Adrian looked out the window again. Seattle glittered beneath the darkening sky. Yes, he said quietly. They are. Maya leaned forward. There's a strategic opportunity here. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time in 5 years, the path ahead felt strangely familiar. Fate had a way of circling back, eventually, and sometimes it delivered something far more powerful than revenge. Opportunity. Adrian turned back to Maya. Prepare a full acquisition strategy, he said calmly, for Lawson Dynamics. Maya's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's a bold move. Adrian allowed himself a faint smile. Not bold. He looked down at the report again. Inevitable. The morning of the acquisition meeting arrived with a cold, bright clarity that Seattle rarely offered. Sunlight reflected sharply off the glass towers downtown, turning the skyline into a field of mirrors. From the conference room on the 32nd floor of Helix Mind Technologies, the city looked calm, almost peaceful. Inside the room, nothing felt peaceful. A long walnut table stretched across the center of the space. Screens along the wall displayed financial projections, stock charts, and acquisition terms. Executives from Helix Mind sat along one side. Across from them sat the leadership team of Lawson Dynamics. 5 years earlier, Adrian Keller had walked into Gregory Lawson's office as an employee, asking permission to resign. Now he entered this room as the man holding the decisive advantage. Adrian paused briefly outside the glass doors before stepping in. His reflection stared back at him. Calm, composed, unrecognizable compared to the man he had once been. Maya Sullivan walked beside him. You ready? She asked quietly. Adrian nodded. I've been ready for 5 years. They stepped inside. The room fell silent almost immediately. Gregory Lawson sat near the center of the opposing side of the table. Age had added subtle lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the confident posture of a man accustomed to authority. Yet this morning, something in his expression looked strained. Next to him sat a woman Adrian had not expected to see. Vanessa Keller, Or rather, Vanessa Lawson. Adrian noticed the nameplate in front of her. Vanessa Lawson, Director of Corporate Communications. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to thin. 5 years. And somehow the past had arranged itself perfectly for this moment. Vanessa looked up as Adrian entered. Her eyes widened. For a fraction of a second, she forgot to hide the shock. Adrian took his seat at the head of the Helix Mind side of the table, directly across from Gregory, directly across from Vanessa. The symmetry felt almost theatrical. Gregory broke the silence first. "Well," he said slowly, "life has an interesting sense of humor." Adrian folded his hands calmly on the table. "It does." Gregory leaned back slightly. "I never imagined we'd meet like this." Adrian's voice remained even. "Neither did I." Vanessa still hadn't spoken. She stared at Adrian as if trying to reconcile two different people, the quiet software engineer she once dismissed, and the man now leading a company valued at nearly $6 billion. Gregory glanced briefly toward her before returning his attention to Adrian. "So," Gregory said, gesturing toward the financial documents, "Helix Mind wants to acquire Lawson Dynamics." "Correct." Gregory chuckled faintly. "That's ambitious." Adrian slid a document across the table. "It's already approved by our investors." Gregory scanned the numbers. His expression tightened slightly, because the offer was not merely ambitious, it was devastatingly effective. Helix Mind had quietly purchased enough Lawson Dynamics stock over the past year to gain controlling interest. This meeting was not a negotiation. It was a formal announcement. Gregory placed the document down carefully. "You planned this," he said quietly. "Yes." "For how long?" Adrian met his gaze. "A while." Gregory studied him. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. The faint realization that the power dynamic between them had completely reversed. Gregory had once controlled Adrian's career. Now Adrian controlled Gregory's company. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice was careful. "You're saying Helix Mind will take over operational leadership?" Adrian nodded. "That's correct." "And what happens to the current executive team?" Adrian glanced briefly toward the Lawson Dynamics directors seated beside Gregory. "The board will review each position individually." Gregory leaned forward slightly. "You're firing us?" Adrian shook his head calmly. "No." Gregory narrowed his eyes. "You're just deciding which of us survive." Adrian said nothing. Silence stretched across the room. Finally, Gregory laughed quietly. "You know what the funniest part of this is?" Adrian waited. Gregory gestured toward him. "I remember the first day you walked into my office as a junior engineer." Adrian did too. "You barely looked confident enough to ask for a raise." Gregory's smile turned sharper. "And now you're sitting here dismantling my company." Adrian spoke softly. "I'm restructuring it." Gregory studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted toward Vanessa. "Do you know," Gregory said casually, "that Adrian once worked 80-hour weeks trying to impress me?" Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Adrian remained calm. Gregory continued. "He believed hard work would earn loyalty." The implication hung heavily in the air. Adrian's voice stayed level. "Loyalty should be earned." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is about?" Adrian tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" Gregory leaned forward. "That hotel conference 5 years ago." The room went completely silent. Vanessa's breath caught. Gregory smiled faintly. "You remember?" Of course Adrian remembered. The hallway, the door, the lie. Gregory tapped the table lightly. "You never said anything about it." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You just left the company." "Yes." Gregory chuckled. "And 5 years later you come back and buy it." Adrian's eyes met his. "Business decisions are rarely emotional." Gregory's smile widened. "I disagree." Across the table, Vanessa looked pale. She finally spoke again, her voice lower. "Adrian." He turned his gaze toward her for the first time. The room seemed to shrink. 5 years had changed her too. She still looked beautiful, but there was something else now. Uncertainty. Maybe even regret. "You built all this," she said softly. "Yes." Vanessa swallowed. "I didn't realize..." Adrian finished the sentence calmly. You didn't realize I could? Vanessa said nothing. Gregory leaned back again, watching them both. Well, he said lightly, this is certainly dramatic. Adrian returned his attention to the documents. The acquisition finalizes today. Gregory nodded slowly. So the employee becomes the owner. Adrian corrected him. The founder becomes the owner. Gregory smirked. Touché. The meeting continued for another hour. Legal details, transition plans, board restructuring. But everyone in the room understood that the real decision had already been made. Helix Mind now controlled Lawson Dynamics. Near the end of the meeting, Gregory stood. He extended his hand across the table. Congratulations, Adrian. Adrian stood as well. They shook hands. The gesture felt symbolic, not of friendship, but of finality. Gregory leaned closer. You know something? He said quietly. Adrian waited. Gregory smiled faintly. For a man who never threw a punch, you hit surprisingly hard. Adrian released his hand. I prefer strategy. Gregory nodded. Yes. He glanced toward Vanessa. Clearly. The Lawson Dynamics executives gathered their papers and began leaving the room. Vanessa remained seated for a moment longer. When she finally stood, she looked at Adrian again, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk later? Adrian considered her for a moment. Then he answered calmly. No. Vanessa flinched slightly. Adrian turned away and began reviewing the final documents with Maya. Behind him, Vanessa stood silently. For the first time in years, she understood something terrible. The man she once dismissed as ordinary had become someone completely beyond her reach. And the worst part? This was only the beginning.
The boardroom of Lawson Dynamics had not changed much in the last decade. The same polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room. The same towering windows overlooked downtown Seattle. The same leather chairs were arranged with quiet precision, designed to remind everyone who entered that power once lived here. But power had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. The special board meeting had been scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning, exactly 1 week after Helix Mind finalized the acquisition. Outside the glass walls, employees moved nervously through the hallways. Rumors had already begun spreading across the company. New leadership, restructuring, investigations. Inside the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to feel. Adrian Keller sat at the head of the table, a stack of reports neatly arranged before him. His posture was calm, composed, almost relaxed. Across from him sat Gregory Lawson. For the first time since Adrian had known him, Gregory did not look entirely in control of the room. Around them, board members and senior executives waited quietly. Vanessa Lawson sat near the far end of the table. Her role in corporate communications required her presence, but she had barely spoken since the acquisition. In truth, she had barely slept all week. Every news article about Helix Mind's takeover reminded her of something she had once believed with absolute certainty, that Adrian Keller would never become a powerful man. Now she sat in a boardroom controlled by him. Adrian glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. He stood. Thank you all for coming, he began. His voice carried easily through the quiet room. As most of you know, Helix Mind Technologies now holds controlling interest in Lawson Dynamics. Several board members nodded stiffly. Adrian continued. The purpose of today's meeting is to review the company's current financial and operational condition before finalizing the restructuring process. Gregory leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You could have sent that in an email, he said dryly. Adrian looked at him calmly. This discussion requires transparency. Gregory smirked. Transparency is fashionable these days. Adrian ignored the remark. He pressed the button on the table remote. The screen behind him lit up with financial charts. Over the past 3 years, Adrian said, Lawson Dynamics has experienced a steady decline in market performance. The graph showed falling revenue, failed projects, and investor losses. Murmurs spread across the table. Adrian flipped to the next slide. Several internal decisions contributed to this decline. Gregory's expression tightened slightly. And whose decisions would those be, he asked. Adrian met his gaze. Executive leadership. Another slide appeared.
Canceled product launches, abandoned research divisions, massive marketing expenditures that produced no measurable results. A board member cleared his throat nervously. "We were aware of some of these issues," the man said carefully. Adrian nodded. "Yes," he clicked again, "but not all of them." The next slide appeared. Several documents filled the screen. Internal emails, financial transfers, confidential expense reports. The room grew quiet. Gregory's smile faded. Adrian continued calmly. "These records show a pattern of corporate resources being redirected for personal and non-strategic purposes." Gregory leaned forward slightly. "You're making serious accusations." Adrian's tone did not change. "I'm presenting documented evidence." Vanessa stared at the screen, her stomach twisted. She recognized one of the dates in the documents. 5 years ago, the same year as the conference. Gregory's voice grew sharper. "Corporate expenses are complex," he said. "You're misinterpreting normal executive authority." Adrian pressed another button. A new document appeared. An internal investigation report, unauthorized financial approvals, unreported executive benefits, misuse of company funds to secure personal investments. The room erupted in murmurs. One board member looked stunned. "Gregory, is this accurate?" Gregory's jaw tightened. "This is a distortion of context." Adrian spoke again. "It's a violation of corporate governance." Silence fell again. Vanessa felt her heart pounding. She looked at Gregory. For years, she had believed he was untouchable, the most powerful man in the room. Now he looked cornered. Gregory turned toward Adrian slowly. "So that's what this is," he said quietly. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "A restructuring." Gregory shook his head. "No." He gestured toward the screen. "This is revenge." The word echoed in the room. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Adrian remained perfectly still. "Revenge would require anger," he said calmly. Gregory's eyes narrowed. "And you're saying you're not angry?" Adrian thought for a moment. Then he answered honestly, "No." Gregory studied him carefully. Then he laughed softly. "That might be the most frightening thing about you." Another board member spoke up. "If these documents are accurate," the woman said, "we're facing serious legal exposure." Adrian nodded. "Yes." Gregory turned toward the board. "You're going to believe him over me?" No one answered immediately. The silence was its own answer. For years, Gregory Lawson had commanded fear and loyalty in equal measure. But fear disappeared quickly when power shifted. Adrian pressed the remote one final time. The last slide appeared. A formal recommendation. Executive removal and board restructuring. Adrian spoke clearly. "Based on the evidence presented, Helix Mind recommends the immediate removal of Gregory Lawson from all executive and board positions within Lawson Dynamics." The words landed like a hammer. Gregory stared at him. "You're serious?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." One by one, the board members began whispering to each other. Votes were cast. Legal advisors nodded grimly. Within 15 minutes, the decision was unanimous. Gregory Lawson had lost control of the company he built. He stood slowly. For a moment, the room felt strangely quiet. Gregory looked around the table, at the executives who once feared him, at the board members who had now abandoned him. Finally, he turned to Adrian. "Well played," Gregory said quietly. Adrian did not respond. Gregory picked up his briefcase. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside Vanessa. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gregory leaned slightly closer. "You chose the wrong man," he murmured. Vanessa flinched. Gregory walked out without another word. The door closed behind him. The room remained silent. Adrian began organizing his documents. The meeting was technically over. But Vanessa had not moved. She sat frozen in her chair. Finally, she stood and walked toward Adrian. Her voice was quiet. "Adrian." He looked up. For the first time since the acquisition, they stood face to face without anyone else speaking. Vanessa searched his eyes. "You planned all of this," she said. "Yes." Her voice trembled slightly. "How long?" Adrian answered calmly. "Long enough." Vanessa's expression slowly crumbled. For years, she had believed she had chosen the stronger man, the more powerful future. Now the truth stood in front of her. She had abandoned a man who would eventually become far greater than the one she chose. "Adrian," she whispered, but she didn't know what to say next, because some mistakes were too large for apologies. Adrian simply nodded politely. Then he returned to reviewing the documents on the table. The meeting was finished, and the past had finally been settled. The fall of Gregory Lawson happened faster than anyone expected. For years, he had been one of the most respected names in Seattle's technology industry. Investors once competed for his attention. Magazines called him a visionary. Young entrepreneurs quoted his speeches as if they were scripture. But power built on arrogance had a fragile foundation. Within 3 weeks of the boardroom decision, the collapse was complete. News outlets across the country reported the scandal. Former CEO removed after internal investigation. Corporate governance violations exposed. Lawson Dynamics undergoes leadership overhaul. Gregory Lawson's name disappeared from industry panels almost overnight. Investors withdrew. Former allies distanced themselves. His reputation, once polished and untouchable, dissolved into something far less impressive. Just another cautionary story. Inside the newly reorganized headquarters of Lawson Dynamics, life moved forward under Helix Mind's leadership. Adrian Keller did not celebrate. He simply worked. The office lights on the top executive floor stayed on late most nights as Adrian and his team rebuilt the company from the inside. The empire Gregory had once ruled now operated under Adrian's quiet discipline. There were no dramatic speeches, no victory laps, just steady progress. For Adrian, the most surprising part was how little satisfaction revenge actually brought. He had imagined this moment many times during the early years of his startup. Imagined confronting Gregory. Imagined the humiliation. Imagined the apology that would never come. But standing at the center of it all now, Adrian realized something important. The victory had happened long before the boardroom meeting. It happened the day he stopped needing their validation. One rainy evening in late November, Adrian remained alone in his office long after the rest of the building had emptied. Seattle's skyline glowed softly beyond the glass walls. A quiet knock sounded on the door. Adrian looked up. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Vanessa stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked different, not dramatically older, but the confidence that once defined her presence had faded. Her clothes were elegant but simple. No designer glamour. No effortless superiority, just the woman standing in front of the man she once left behind. "I wasn't sure if you'd see me," she said softly. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "I almost didn't." Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's fair." She remained standing near the door, as if unsure how far she was allowed to step into the room. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, she spoke again. "I saw the news about Gregory." Adrian didn't react. "His investors dropped him," she continued. "He's under investigation now." Adrian folded his hands on the desk. "Yes." Vanessa looked down briefly. "I left him." Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "When?" "A month ago." He said nothing. Vanessa let out a quiet breath. It turns out power looks very different when it disappears. Adrian studied her carefully. 5 years earlier, she had stood in a hotel hallway insisting nothing had happened. Now the truth sat heavily in the room between them. "I made a mistake," Vanessa said finally. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. Adrian remained silent. Vanessa stepped a little closer. "You were always the better man," she continued. "I just didn't see it." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "No," he said calmly. "You saw it." Vanessa looked confused. "You just didn't value it." Her eyes filled with emotion. "Adrian, I valued stability," she said quietly. "I thought success meant something else." Adrian nodded. "And now?" Vanessa looked around the office. The skyline. The company name etched on the glass wall. The quiet authority of the man sitting across from her. "Now I understand," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "I understand what I threw away." Adrian watched her for a long moment. Then he stood. The movement seemed to make Vanessa hopeful. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Relief. Possibility. But Adrian simply walked around the desk and stopped a few feet in front of her. Not close enough to touch, just close enough for the truth to land clearly. You didn't throw me away, Adrian said quietly. Vanessa blinked. What do you mean? Adrian's voice was calm. You chose someone else. The distinction mattered. Vanessa's shoulders sank slightly. I was wrong. Yes, the honesty in his answer hurt more than anger would have. Tears began forming in her eyes. I regret it every day, she whispered. Adrian believed her. He could see it in the exhaustion in her face, the quiet collapse of someone who had finally realized the cost of her decisions. But regret did not rewrite the past. Vanessa looked up at him. Is there any chance, she began. Adrian already knew the question. He answered before she could finish. No. The word was gentle, but absolute. Vanessa's breath caught. Not even after everything? She asked. Adrian shook his head slowly. Especially after everything. Tears rolled down her cheeks now. I loved you once, she said. Adrian nodded. I know. And you loved me. Yes. Vanessa's voice broke. Doesn't that mean anything? Adrian looked out the window for a moment before answering. It meant everything, he said quietly. Then he looked back at her. But trust only dies once. The words settled heavily between them. Vanessa understood. There would be no second chance, no dramatic reconciliation, no miracle that could undo the night she walked out of Gregory Lawson's hotel room. Adrian stepped back toward his desk. I don't hate you, he added. Vanessa wiped her tears. That might be worse. Adrian almost smiled. Maybe. She stood there for another long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I guess this is goodbye. Adrian inclined his head slightly. Yes. Vanessa walked toward the door. Her hand paused on the handle. She turned back one last time. You really won, you know, she said quietly. Adrian shook his head. No. Vanessa frowned. You didn't? Adrian looked around the office, the company, the city, the life he had rebuilt from nothing. I stopped losing, he said. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she opened the door and walked out. The hallway swallowed her footsteps. Adrian stood alone in the office again. Seattle's rain had started outside, streaking softly down the glass windows. For a long time, he simply watched the city. 5 years earlier, he had believed that betrayal had destroyed his life. Now he understood something different. Sometimes betrayal did not end a man's story. Sometimes it forced him to write a better one. And somewhere in the rainy streets below, 2 people who once believed they controlled his fate were now learning the same lesson. Some choices could never be undone. And some victories were not about revenge at all. They were about becoming someone the past could never touch again. Adrian Keller turned off the office lights. Then he walked out into the night. Free.